Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On in FlintTalkRadio.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program called What's Going On, and we're very glad to have you there, whatever time you are tuning in the program. And sometimes we will tune in at 2 o'clock, the starting time for the program, but then we're up on the different networks, Facebook, you name it, and you can tune us in at your convenience. We're very glad to have you with us because I think we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to spend the whole hour talking about the George Zimmerman trial, and I want to try to share some insights. I don't think some of the insights I'm going to be sharing have been shared by anybody else, and so some of the things I'll be saying here on the network this afternoon will be somewhat, I think, a little bit more what is the word? I don't want to say refreshing. I want to say more analytical than what I've been looking at on television and what I've been listening to on the radio programs and so on. I do have some different things to say about it. I must say, first of all, that I agree with the verdict that was passed down by the 6 jurors, and I think they did an outstanding job. Although I was kind of worried about them for a while. I didn't know why it took so long to deliver what I thought was a cut and dried case, given how the prosecution handled itself. And I guess also because of the things I knew behind the scenes that was going on prior to the trial even being held. And I'm going to try to share some of that with you because there's some things going on that have not yet come to the surface, but I think it is going to come to the surface in the long run because already they are talking about getting ready to, in the aftermath of that ruling, George Zimmerman's attorneys are now talking about getting ready for suing the media, and there's going to be a price to pay for the kind of characterization they did in the media about this case, and I think the mischaracterization almost in total about who George Zimmerman is. We have a lot of things to say this afternoon. Let me see if I can start off though with the ruling itself, and then what occurred in the aftermath of the ruling, the 2 press conferences that were held, one by the prosecutor's team, and then later on they had an interview by those who were the 2 defenders, who I think did a marvelous job. And really they put on the case in the Zimmerman trial. I'm going to actually take you into the jury room, which some would say, well, the jurors have not come out and said anything about this trial yet. But I'm going to take you into that jury room because I think I have put together, although you're right about that, they have not come out with any statement at this point. I hope they will come out, and I want to see how their deliberations play into what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. I'm going to give you some ideas about a couple of things that I think was going on by the jurors. I'm going to tell you why I think it took 16 hours for them to come to a conclusion and reach the right verdict. And I think that was the right verdict, and anyone that is fair-minded that knows the case and have been anyone who's been paying attention to what occurred, what the evidence is, will agree. If you really know the evidence, you will agree that the jurors did an outstanding job and they did reach the right conclusion. I'm not talking about those out there that are carrying these signs out here that are talking about no justice and no peace, which does not mean that at all. What they mean is if they don't get a conviction, then they plan to go out there and do what they did in Oakland and some of the other cities like Miami, Florida, and some of the others. They weren't talking about justice. Justice was delivered in this case. What they were talking about was conviction. They were talking even beyond that. They were talking about revenge. So I want to bring some insights, I think, to the table, and we can have a conversation that is civil and just look at the evidence in this case, because the evidence is overwhelming in terms of why the jury had no other recourse, particularly when you understand the statutory regulations they were under, the mandates of the law in the state of Florida that guided this decision down the pathway in the only way that it could go. And I think that, again, the 2 attorneys, and you know, they were talking about the Dream Team when they had O.J. Simpson on trial, and when the jury exonerated him in 1995. Some of you can recall that trial. And they were talking about the Dream Team. They were talking about F.E. Bailey and some of the others. The one that got this program on, that he does this Zoom.com, the legal thing that he put together in the aftermath of that trial. I can't think of his name right now, but he was the only one really on that team that had any principles. And I wish I could recall his name, because he and F. Lee Bailey fell out because he couldn't pull out of the trial because he was the lawyer of note. But he began to have some real serious questions about the evidence in this case, and how they were in fact doing everything within their power to turn O.J. Simpson loose, regardless as to the evidence. I understand lawyers have to defend their client, but sometimes you look at some of the things that are your conscience, and two people are dead, and I think that they began to have some internal discussions that were not palatable to him staying on the team. Yet he could not get off the team, because then it looks like he is selling his client down the drain. I think that would probably brought about disbarment. So he stayed the course. But I listened to those who called that the Dream Team, and I don't think that was a Dream Team. Johnny Cochran saying to the jurors, I think in a more or less Baptist minister's voice, because most blacks are Baptists, and I think that he just appealed to them through the emotion in that trial, and made such statements as, if the gloves don't fit, which was a mistake on the part of the prosecution to let him put those gloves on when he already had a pair of gloves on. They weren't called gloves; they were cellophane. They were cellophane gloves. The cellophane you put over your hands so you won't contaminate the evidence. And he had those on, and then try to put a pair of gloves over that. Obviously, it's not going to fit. And here's Johnny Cochran telling the jurors, who, in my estimation, were looking for an out in this case in the first place. They wanted revenge. They wanted to get back because of what had happened to Rodney King a couple of years earlier, and they wanted to get back at the Los Angeles Police Department. And they were willing to be led down a path that would make the outstanding and ridiculous claim that O.J. Simpson had been framed. And so when Johnny Cochran got up there and said, if the gloves don't fit, you must acquit, that's all they needed to hear. And they went into the jury room, didn't stay that long, and came back with an acquittal on all counts. And I looked at that case as well and saw the evidence in it. And if the jury was really looking to weigh the evidence, O.J. Simpson is in jail after that case, not for the one that he did down in Florida, where I think they were excessive in terms of the amount of time they gave him for trying to get back his own items, his trophies and things like that. They were being sold in, it wasn't in Miami, it was in Las Vegas. But that's another story. I'm just simply laying the groundwork here for what just recently occurred, and I watched every second of this trial. I made it a point to tape it, and I will give HLN credit for having done a very good job in terms of showing the trial. And those persons on my Facebook wall that were saying, well, how do we know that they actually showed all of the trial? How do we know they were not editing it out? Well, the way I know it is because what they would do when they put it on pause, and then they go to commercial break and then come back to it, what they would do after the pause button had been released, it would back up to where they had made a previous comment, maybe the last 3 or 4 words in the previous comment, and then start from there and go forward. So I know then at that point that they were in fact showing us what occurred in the trial without trying to edit it out. That was not the problem HLN had. The problem they had was that when it got to the commentary in terms of the afternoon talk shows after the trial had run its course for the day, you then had to deal with Jane Velez Mitchell and Nancy Grace and this other person there on the station. I don't really pay attention a lot of attention to. I don't actually watch it because the bias there is just too much for me to digest. I mean, my ethics will not allow me to sit there and watch this propaganda. But the problem wasn't in the broadcast of the trial. The problem for the HLN station was that they were, in fact, in the aftermath of the trial coming to a close, they were actually talking about something that never occurred. And I was watching the trial, And then I would listen to the commentary, and I say, well, that didn't happen, and it didn't happen in that way. And these things they're doing in this particular regard is, in fact, a framing of the issues, and it amounts to propaganda. I can give you many different instances of that, but one of them was when they had Miss Gladys Zimmerman to testify. And you would not even know that she was on the stand by what Nancy Grace did. They went to everything else but her. But that woman had, I was really impressed with her testimony, which didn't tell me anything new, because I already had concluded that the person that was hollering on that tape, no way in the world was that Trayvon Martin. And we might as well get off that right now. And I'm going to talk about why that would be true. But I don't even know why we were discussing that, trying to find out who's on that tape. Because there's no doubt about who's on that tape. We just have to look at the physical evidence to draw a conclusion there. And I hope we'll be able to come back to that, because I want to go into that. But in terms of Ms. Gladys Zimmerman, who came on the stand, and she was pretty much there just to verify what a total of 7 witnesses had said without any vacillation, which was different than when it was the case on the prosecutor's side. They had asked the father, Tracy Martin, if that was his son's voice. There was a reporting of that in the office of the sheriff, one of the authorities, and they asked him if that was his son's voice, and his first reaction was that he didn't think that was his son's voice. Later on, he changed it. Javaris, who was Trayvon Martin's brother, seems to be his half-brother, because his name is Javaris Fulton. It seems to me that they're half-brothers, and I would like to have seen the prosecutors, by the way, go down that road to establish when they asked Trayvon and Javaris' mom what was her marital state, and she said she was divorced, and her name is Sabrina Fulton, and her oldest son, who is 21 years old, 4 years older than Trayvon, his name is Fulton, and Trayvon's name is Martin, and she's divorced, and she doesn't have Martin's name, and the name Fulton is the family name, and I know that because she says her brother, and her brother's name Fulton. So I'd like to, they were putting on this phase here of this stable family he came out of and things of that sort, but the two parents were not even married to each other, and I don't see anything on the record that said they were ever married. I'd like to have had that explored, just to see what part of that apparatus was in fact untrue, because a lot of the narration they had about the whole case was in fact fabricated, much of it fabricated by the media, but they explored it only to get to a certain point. They were asking about what the prosecutors wanted to do was ask about whose voice was on that tape. And I noticed how careful they were, by the way, in terms of making sure that they didn't open up any doors, any pathways for the defense to open up any corridors about the kind of character that Trayvon Martin had. There were a lot of subtleties going on in this trial that if you were not really paying attention, there were a lot of things that went on that would have gone right by you. But I was watching it on your behalf, those listeners in flinttalkradio.com, and also those on Facebook, so that I can come and tell you what the story was, because I was watching it, and sometimes I go back and watch it again when I miss something. So I was up to 2 o'clock in the morning on some days, making sure that I was in fact comprehending what was going on, and I was looking for some of the subtleties so that I could understand the things that were not so visible in the courtroom. And I noticed that when they were interrogating Miss Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon Martin's mother, they were very careful in not opening up any paths to which the defense could bring in the character question, because they could have changed the whole landscape if that had come in. So what the prosecution did in that case, and I'm going to get back to Ms. Gladys Zimmerman just a minute, what they did in that case was that they asked Sabrina Fulton, did Trayvon have any marks on his body? And the answer was yes. Then they said, what were those marks? And the answer was he had tattoos. Now we're thinking about is that this bird that plays with Miami that had tattoos up his neck, all over his body. Is it that kind of a thing? Because if that's what the case is, then that hurts the prosecution's case. Because the tattoos all over your body, that kind of sends out an impression that it may be a person that was out here with a lot of this, insignia on his body that might have put him into some groups that were not all that as far as their social behavior out there in the community, and so that could have led down a road that could have been very bad for the prosecution. But what they were doing was bringing out what was on the tattoo, because the next question was, after you said that he had tattoos, then the question was, and what was on that tattoo? And the answer there was on that tattoo, what was on that tattoo was an inscription that said, "I love you, Mom." That was a sole interest that the prosecutors had about bringing out anything about Trayvon Martin. And of course what it didn't open up any pathways for anything else to come in about Trayvon Martin on the part of the defense. And they knew a lot of information about Trayvon, and they knew that what the media had done with his image was in fact a fabrication that was first started by the prosecution team. This was pretty much done by Angela Corey, who was the state attorney in the case. Put out a picture of Trayvon when he was 12 years old. There he is riding a pony, and this innocent-looking child when he's 11 or 12 years old. All of that was fabricated by the prosecution team. And of course they had an accomplice in terms of the media projecting this image so as to make it appear that this grown man overwhelmed a boy who only went to the store to buy tea, a can of tea, and a bag of Skittles. And look what happened to him as he was racially profiled. That was the image they were putting out. So I'd like to have seen that discussion going on a lot more, because if they had really explored that, the question of the marital status of Miss Sabrina Fulton would have been interesting, because then we got another narrative about what kind of family Trayvon Martin came out of. And I think that was concrete, because when I saw the father and mother sitting together in the court every day side by side, I never saw any interaction between them. I never even saw those shoulders touch each other during the 14 days of the trial. I never saw them in a conversation. I saw them both sitting there stoically, but there was no interaction between the two of them, and that told me a lot. But the name Fulton and not the name Martin, and that Fulton is the family name of Miss Sabrina Fulton, not her married name of either of the men that would have been the father of her children, because her brother's name is Fulton, as is her oldest son. And her name is not Martin, which would be the name of the father of her youngest son. So I'd like to know more about that and what that means. Only not to discredit and make that to be that if they came out of another kind of family, that means then that Trayvon Martin is guilty. That's not the point. The point is that the media has, in fact, projecting an image here, and we need to go behind the projection of the media, and which we're going to be doing because the suits are coming. I mean, the SUITS, where someone is getting ready to be sued. And it's just not one entity. There's going to be a whole lot of folks lining up. And the matter we get the checkbooks ready right now. But we need to find out about whether or not that was a framing of some things here to propagandize this case. Because a lot of what was happening in front of the public that they were not able to discern what was really going on was not happening at all as far as what the material facts were in this case. Let me go back to Ms. Gladys Zimmerman. She's on the stand. You would not have known that by Nancy Grace, who on the day that she testified went to about 50 some odd minutes of her program, and you never even heard about Miss Gladys Zimmerman. You would not even know she was on the stand that day. But she was put there, and I must say this woman has so much dignity. She came to the stand, and they asked her, after getting her credentials and all of that, and she was obviously Hispanic, as was her brother, who was even more Hispanic looking. They were not as light as Trayvon. You could tell they had less mixture than Trayvon. Trayvon's father looked like he was maybe Peruvian. I don't know. He didn't seem like he was. They say he was Jewish, but he was not. You know, he wasn't white Jewish.
Trayvon or George Zimmerman?
No, I'm talking about Trayvon. I'm talking about Mr. Zimmerman's family father.
Okay.
The mom was obviously Hispanic,
Right.
And her brother was darker than she was. There's no question about the fact that they were, Hispanic. There's no doubt about that. Now George Zimmerman is less Hispanic, but that's because he's mixed in with his father. But his father was not a. If he was Jewish, he was not white skinned Jewish. He was lighter than the mother was, but he was a dark skinned, a relatively dark skinned. Let's say light. Can I say light dark skin? Light brown skin. Dark brown skin. Anyway, you could tell he was not white. Let me put it that way. And when she got on the stand, obviously Hispanic, they asked her, whose voice do you hear on that tape? And she said, George. Said it with so much finality that you had to pay attention to it. And then they asked her, how do you know that's your son? No, they said, how do you know that that's George Zimmerman? And she said, he's my son. And that was all she said. And that was profound. I wrote on my Facebook wall that she didn't have to tell me that because the physical evidence told me. Although 7 people got up there on that stand, wherein the prosecutors had 2 people that testified that was Trayvon Martin's voice in that tape. 7 people came and testified that the voice was that of George Zimmerman. Why didn't they bring some of Trayvon Martin's friends? Like the one they brought up there, like Rochelle Jantel. Why didn't they bring some of the other friends? I mean, that would have been interesting, wouldn't it? Why didn't they do that? Why didn't they bring some more of the people that this person was walking around with, that was in this entourage of friends? Why didn't they put some of those persons on the witness stand? And what would that have done to the case? What would that have done to bringing out more of who this person was, who's been carefully concealed from the media? Now, those of us who studied the case, we figured out who he is, but they carefully concealed him. And you didn't see one of his friends in that trial. In fact, let me tell you what they were doing with his brother. Because I told you earlier that in the testimony, they wanted to make sure that they opened up any pathways for the defense to come into bringing out any character issues about Trayvon. And they weren't even interested in doing that. But in order to defend their client, if they came out and said some things that were not true about the character and put him up here on this white horse, they had to, in fact, then give the evidence. The prosecutors did not want to go down that pathway. But here's what they did. They brought the mom up there, Mr. Brandon Fulton, asked her about the tattoo, got her off the stand, and then brought his brother in. And then they began to ask the brother character questions. How old are you? What are you doing right now? Found out he was a 21-year-old person going to college. He's a senior starting off in the fall. And the way that the prosecutors did it, and it was an act of genius on their part, the idea was that if Trayvon were alive, he would be like his brother on his way to college. And look at what his brother is accomplishing. A senior as of September of later on this year. And if Trayvon had been alive, the implication of it is that that's exactly the pathway he was going down. They didn't say it. They couldn't say it. It would not have been true it would not have been true if they had said it. And if they had said it, they could have brought in other conversations from the defense's standpoint, and that wouldn't have gone well. There's nothing in this case went well. And when I get to the part, if I have enough time in this conversation, I'm going to tell you what that jury was in fact in that room dealing with. Because I think I figured out, without even being in the room, and without either one of those 6 jurors, all the women, 5 white women and 1 black Hispanic, if you can say that. I never knew that you could say white Hispanic in these terms. But the President of the United States is a white black person. I mean, that'd be the equivalent of what they did with George Zimmerman. But we got to understand why they did that. But that's my son. He's my son. And I said to myself that you're the First person to say that. Then they brought his uncle up there. He said it. And they brought 5 more up there to say it. And overwhelmed the 2 that said that was Trayvon Martin's voice. And the 2 that said it was his voice, well, there were really 3 that said it. 2 of them had been obfuscating about it. One, they weren't sure at first. Javaris, his brother, was not sure about it at first. Then he became very sure. The dad was on record not being sure about it. And I heard the testimony of 2 of the interrogating police officers. See, that's what I was trying to tell people on my post who wanted to come on my post with the usual gibberish, the emotional gibberish. I was telling them this. Look, you can't tell them anything about this case because you weren't willing to put the time into it to study the evidence. I watched every minute of the trial. Were they willing to do that? I was at 2 o'clock in the morning. Were they willing to stop it and go back and stop it and go back and watch it at 2 o'clock in the morning every day for 14 days? They weren't willing to do that. You have to get on my wall telling me what the evidence is or what they believe is what they were saying because they didn't have any evidence. I asked one person, I just did a program with him, with the Reverend C.L. Bryant. He knows who I'm talking about, and I'm talking about him on the air. I'm not going to mention his name, but he knows who I'm talking about, a black conservative who disgusted me, and I told him he disgusted me, and I put it on my wall that he disgusted me. The black conservative disgusted me in this trial, talking about black conservatives for Trayvon Martin. You got to be out of your friggin' mind, you black conservatives. You sound, and I'll tell you why I say that. And I'm going to tell you straight up to your face. You are disgusted. There's no way that you can give justice to the dead. The justice is for the living. And if you really were about justice, you've been calling for justice for George Zimmerman, whatever that justice is, based upon the evidence. Let me tell you what you were doing. Let me get you straight and tell you exactly what you were doing. You were doing the same thing as I said in one of my posts when I was watching cowboy pictures. You remember those cowboy movies we watched as children? They had the sheriff standing out there on the steps of the building which housed the prisoner. They had a rancher that was in fact killed, and that was their friend. They are there with their guns, and they wanted to do justice to the dead. They had their guns out, and there's the sheriff with his rifle, his shotgun over his elbow, and he's saying to them that as they're saying they want justice for the dead, he was standing there resolutely in front of them, in front of that prison, and saying that this is not justice. The justice is, in fact, carrying him before the court and then putting the evidence on trial. You can't have justice for the dead. The dead is already gone. You must claim you want justice now for the living, and whatever that justice leads to, that's the evidence in the case. By you even talking about you want to have justice for Trayvon Martin, show what you really were talking about. And I found you to be disgusted, and I told you that to your face. And I'll tell you again to your face. And he wrote me back and said, I don't like your presentation. I told him, I don't care if you like it or not. You know, they have to understand the name. You see, people have not really figured it out. Although those persons, I got some of the people that plugged into my post last week and asked for friendship. Now that I'm trying to get into that or grow my readership, but it is growing because one thing they found out is that I'm going to do that which has integrity in it. And I said in my post that when I criticized the black liberals and then came around and criticized the black conservatives and said that means then I don't have any friends, right? And I said that I don't need any friends. I don't want any friends. The only friends I have is the truth. And anyone who doesn't stand for it, I want you to know right now, my record is very clear. Everybody that's worked with me, the superintendent of the schools, who is no longer there, but he knows it also.
What I'd like to know, too, is, some people I've had people chime in on me and tell me, well, he was so much younger than, George Zimmerman. As he was on top of him, slamming him in the face with his fist. And people say, well, he didn't deserve to, pull the gun. There's no reason for him to pull the gun. I said, I don't think these people have ever been in a fight. Because when you get hit, you get clocked. It doesn't take much to kill somebody when you're beating them in the head.
I will tell you.
Take much.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. I need to see. That's what I'm trying to get to that point because I want to talk about that, John. I got to get to that point and discuss that in terms of the interest that George Zimmerman sustained and why it was so minor, quote unquote, to all the ones who were coming in on it. You know why? Basically, I'll talk about this later, but right now I'll just say this about it. It's because that was his head and not yours. I said this on my wall also. You see, this idea that it's what you say a lot of times. You say that I feel your pain. You know something? It's impossible for anybody to feel anybody else's pain. You can claim that. I mean, my mom would say it all the time. She'd say, as she was whooping me, she'd say, "This is hurting me more than it's hurting you." I never believed that. I understand her psychic, the psychic aspect to it, but those are webs on my back, not on my mom's back. You can never feel the pain of another person unless the injury is also happening to you. And so it looked like that he didn't have to pull his gun out because those are wounds on George Zimmerman's head. How do you feel about it if that was the wounds that was on your head? I think you'd have a different understanding of it. And the prosecutors knew they had a problem even in that case, because what they had to contend there was that, given the fact that they were now claiming that he could not have gotten his gun out because he'd been straddled by Trayvon Martin. So if his leg's up there in front of you and the gun is in back of Trayvon Martin's legs, how did he get his gun out? Now they got to come up with this other claim they were making, because they were reaching for straws. And then they coming out with the gun was already out. Well, let me tell the prosecutors this, because I think that if they're going to really investigate this case here, and that's you, Angela Corey, and it's also the governor of the state of Florida. Because you know what you all did down there? There were some people that stood up on principle that did not arrest George Zimmerman for 44 days. You know why? Because they understood that legally they had no ground to stand on, and they refused to take this case forward. What you did behind the scenes, you see, I know this case. What you did was move folks over the side, move Angela Corey into the state attorney's office, and got her to go forward with the case. And I watched her in that press conference live from one end to the other talking about we had a strong case. Oh, yeah, that was you also, Bernie De La Rianda. There was also you, John Guy, and you, Richard Mantell. Mantell, you were the one that after the two sides arrested that case, you're the one that came in the courtroom knowing that you had lost that case, knowing you wanted the conviction under any circumstance, and you're the one that wanted to add 2 different charges to the original accusation against George Zimmerman, because you knew the second-degree murder would not work. You knew that you overcharged him by a clear statute in the state of Florida. And what you did was wanted to add manslaughter. Okay, I understand that. Although the judge should not have let it in because it came in after the trial had been lost. But then you wanted to add another charge to make it clear, to try to get a conviction. Because what you were doing at that point was throwing anything, spaghetti on the walls, hoping one would stick. And what you did in that case there is that you wanted to, in fact, bring about child abuse. And then say that in terms of Trayvon Martin being 17 years old, and in fact him being killed by a grown man, amounted to child abuse, which is on the statutory, on the books, where the statutes of the state of Florida are, that are designed for parents who may in fact be disciplining their children and go overboard, and through the child abuse of that child, the child comes up dead. They want to apply that statute, which had nothing to do with George Zimmerman, and use that as a basis for a third-degree murder charge. Because you have to have something to base it on. And they're going to base it upon child abuse, which had nothing to do with that. And let me tell you what else they did with that, because that was egregious. Because if you understand that part, if you understand what I'm going to say next, you'll understand why during the press conference, the attorney named Don West stated in his statement, let me read his statement to you, and I want to tell you why he was outraged. Here's what he said. He says, sometimes I can be a little blunt. No, what he said was, sometimes I can be a little more blunt. Why is he saying that? Because in the courtroom, there are many times when Don West was outraged over what Deborah Nelson, the judge in this case, was doing, and there were things he could not say because you are licensed by the state. And she warned him on 3 different occasions that there is a professional decorum in the courtroom that you are required to follow. And I've told you, she said this to him at the end of the trial, and I've told you on 3 different occasions about the professional decorum that you must in fact maintain. She was warning him to shut up. But his objection in one of those cases there was absolutely down right on target. When she before the state, I should say this, before the defense rested his case, she went and asked George Zimmerman directly, did he intend to take the witness stand? Why would she want to know that? And why would she go directly to him and not go through his attorney? And what Don West said is, Your Honor, I object. She said, objection overruled. And he began to interrogate him again. He said, Your Honor, I object. And she said, your objection is overruled. He objected again. He was disgusted with that. Because why did he have counsel? But the counsel, people that watched that were shocked at that conversation. And if Don Abrams, who I heard on ABC this morning, had understood anything, he would not have made these outrageous comments he made on Good Morning America this morning, by saying that Don West was overboard in some of the claims he made. Because here's what he said in the press conference. He said that sometimes I can be a little more blunt, meaning that he can now be more blunt spoken. I think the prosecution of George Zimmerman was disgraceful. I am grateful by the jury's verdict. As happy as I am for George Zimmerman, see, I have to adjust my glasses here. I'm thrilled that this guy, I'm thrilled that this jury kept this tragedy from being a travesty. It was already a tragedy. The jury, he's saying, kept it from being a travesty on top of it being a tragedy. Thrilled that this jury kept this tragedy from becoming a travesty. For that we are eternally grateful. But it makes me sad too that it took this long under these circumstances to finally get justice. And I noticed him when Mark O'Mara, who was the other attorney in this case, and they were absolutely brilliant in this case. I quite frankly have seen trials before. I have never seen lawyers this dynamic, who had their ducks all lined up and had their arguments precise, concise, and tight. I ain't never seen anything like it. Everything they did in that trial was purposeful, where everything was lined up that led into something else. And that includes setting up the prosecution's main pathologist, their forensic pathologist, Dr. Bao, B-A-O, is the spelling of his name, and they use his testimony. He was a prosecution witness, but they're using his testimony to set up the testimony of their own witness, who was a forensics pathologist, one of the best in the world, a pathologist by the name of Vincent DeMayo. And when he came on the witness stand, he went right down the line and showing those injuries to George Zimmerman, and it blew out of the water the really all across the board forensic testimony of Dr. Bao. And that was very clear when Dr. Vincent DeMayo testified, where he was right down the line and gave an absolute assault upon the prosecution's case with his testimony. And this man, by the way, was even quoted when Dr. Bao was the prosecution's key forensic witness was testifying, because this guy has written textbooks, 4 textbooks, and written 88 articles on it. People are quoting his work, and had done forensic pathology testimony in 5 different countries. There was nobody that could match this person. This person is one of the greatest forensic pathologists in the world, and he was testifying about the evidence in this case. Now they were saying, because they were reaching for straws here, that there's no way that George Zimmerman, to get to his gun, they use this dummy to get on the floor, and they're going to show how, if George Zimmerman was being straddled by Trayvon Martin, how did he get to his gun? Because his knees would have been in the front of George Zimmerman, and he'd have to reach around him to get the gun, which is in the right side of his pants. He had it as a insulated weapon. It had to be concealed by the state laws in Florida, so it's inside of his pants in a holster. So the question was, how would he reach around Trayvon, right, and get the gun? And because they were contending that would have been impossible, they're now claiming, without any evidence, which they had very little evidence, anything they were claiming in this case. And they were claiming that the gun was already out. Now that would be really an interesting claim, because what we have on that tape of that voice screaming, we have that tape of the phone call to the police, 911, which is now recording the person calling, and that person's name is John Good, who testified that he came out for about 10 seconds. He saw the scuffle going on and told him to stop, and nobody stopped. He saw hands going down because Trayvon Martin was on top of George Zimmerman, and nobody stopped, and he saw him doing what looked like martial arts. And he saw his hand going down toward George Zimmerman, which he took as using mixed martial arts tactics, and Zimmerman being pummeled. Him being pummeled. Now that's key testimony. But what I want you to understand here is that that's 10 seconds outside. No phone call has been made to the 911 by John Good. He goes back in the house, and once he makes a phone call, there is the screaming for help on that tape, which went on for 40 seconds. Now, to go outside because he heard someone screaming, be out there 10 seconds, go back in the house, call 911, and on the tape, 40 seconds of having someone screaming, that will give you at least, what, a minute plus of someone screaming for help on that tape. Yet he's supposed to have his gun out and hasn't used it. And if he has his gun out and didn't use it, that would just show his restraint. So you can't contend what the prosecutors were contending, that he didn't kill Trayvon Martin because he had to. He killed him because he wanted to, because he was a wannabe police officer. And they were doing they were doing this kind of prosecution throughout the trial. And why were they doing it? Because they didn't have any cases, and they knew they didn't have any case. That's why John Guy, who was doing the final argument for the prosecutors, who came behind the brilliant one-time chance at final arguments that was done by Mark O'Mara, who was the leading attorney, and they matched each other very well. One was playing hardball, one was playing a little bit more softball. Mark O'Mara was playing the lightweight in terms of the interaction with the judge, while Don West was playing the very much the heavyweight in terms of confronting this judge, and should have confronted this judge within the limits of what is allowed under professional conduct, because this judge in a number of cases was acting inappropriately in this trial, and you can see the bias on a number of occasions, as I was able to detect. So they now continue, he had his gun out, but yet you have all this time, this lag, and Trayvon Martin has not been shot yet. That makes no sense. And it makes no sense for us to believe, not for 1 minute, that Trayvon Martin is the one calling for help. That is a charade. I don't even know why we have to go down that road and listen to anybody testifying about that, because we saw the physical injuries. There were 6 different abrasions in George Zimmerman's head, swollen on both sides of his head, a busted nose, which was not bleeding when Trayvon puts his hands over his mouth. Why? Because he's on his back, and that blood is coagulating in his throat and going down his throat into his down his nasal passages into his throat, and being swallowed in his lungs. I mean, that's what's going on here. And that's why there's no blood there when he put his hand on his mouth trying to quiet him down, as he was in fact hollering. The prosecutors knew this. But when he stands up, though, you see the bleeding that had occurred, because his nose was in fact busted. You know what the marks were on Trayvon Martin? Those of you trying to contend that you don't know the evidence and that this man Zimmerman should be in jail, let me tell you what the marks were on Trayvon Martin. There was a mark on his ring finger. I wonder why that mark would be there. On his knuckle. And the only other mark on Trayvon Martin was a bullet wound, which, by the way, in the pathologist's testimony was that the bullet wound. And you see, I learned something. I was listening to these pathologists. I was a pre-law student, I was, I went and started teaching and didn't go back to law, didn't go to law school, but I was a pre-law major. And I was learning so much science. I liked biology when I was in high school, and that always intrigued me. But I learned a lot of things about pathology, forensics in this trial. And when Dr. Vincent DeMayo said that he could tell that gun that was fired never touched Trayvon Martin's skin, and that was 2 to 4 inches, no more than 6 inches away from his body at the time, and the position of the shirt, that was really interesting. I didn't know, for example, and how many of you out there know, that when you, in fact, fire a bullet, John, you probably mess with guns more than I do, so you probably know this, but I didn't know it. I thought that the hole was made by the bullet. I didn't know that the first hole is made, for example, in the wear, in the clothing, for example, and if you have next to your body, it will make it. Even a blank will do it. And that is, the hole comes from a combination of the gas and the air mixing together, and that makes the first puncture, and the bullet makes it more decisive. After the bullet then passes through, it leaves a residue, which he called a soot tattoo, which is really the sulfur, that follows the bullet into the passageway. And he was able to determine by the soot tattoo around the clothing exactly how far that gun was from the person, and also the fact that the stain was away from the body, meaning that it was consistent with the person leaning over George Zimmerman. All that from the forensics. It was fascinating testimony. And so when they could not refute that, and then George Zimmerman can't get to his gun because he's now straddling George Zimmerman, when the prosecution took that up and said he couldn't get to his gun, they didn't know they were admitting at that time that they were admitting that they were clear about Trayvon Martin being on top, because now the argument is he couldn't get to his gun, and they were arguing that there was no way, so he had to have his gun out. And even talked about they could be standing up. When that came up, they tried that as an argument. They were doing anything to try to make this conviction stick. They were going to frame this man, and they wanted a conviction at all costs. And we now know pretty much what occurred. One of the brilliant things in the closing arguments of the defense, they put a clock on the table, one that the jurors could see very clearly from where they were sitting. And they then said, Malcolm O'Mara said, I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes, and I'm just going to, in fact, let you rest, relax, don't go away, and just look at this clock. And that clock went from 0 to 4 minutes. And why did the defense do that? Because what they had done was line up the time sequence in this trial in the events that occurred that night. They used the phone call of Rachel Jantel, who was the girl on the phone. She's 19 years old now and will be a senior in school, I guess, in the fall. And they used the phone call she made when it hung up, and they then and she had told the prosecutors, and also testified when the defense was cross-examining her, that Trayvon had told her he's only a few doors from his house. So what they were doing with that stopwatch was letting the juror see that Trayvon Martin was no more than 400 feet from his home. That's about a football field, and that's 300 feet. So another 100 feet, another 100 feet away from a football field. So he had to go to a football field, then 100 feet beyond that, because 300 feet is the football field itself. And then you have the distance he was from his home. It's in shouting distance of his home. I think the evidence really shows that Trayvon Martin had arrived at his home. I think the evidence is very clear about that, because he told Rachel Jantel said that he was running. How long does it take you to run from a football field plus another 100 feet? That's 400 feet. The 400 feet, that's 300. That's 100 yards plus 100 more feet. You ever heard of the 100-yard dash? They do that in 9 seconds. I'm not saying he was an athlete, so it wouldn't take him. He couldn't do it in 9 seconds. That's Billy Bob Hayes, for example. That's somebody. That's that guy that won those medals. That won more medals in the Olympics than the Olympic Jesse Owens in 1936 did. I'm not saying you can do it in that speed. I'm just simply saying that 4 minutes I could do it in a third of that time. I could run 300 feet plus another 100 feet within a minute. I'm sure. I mean, they're doing it in 9 seconds. They're doing the 100-yard dash, 300 feet, in 9 seconds. I'm sure I can do it in a minute. That wouldn't be hard. And he was within 400 feet of his home, and this altercation has not occurred yet. Now, you persons out there who are talking about a bag of Skittles and a pop, I want you to understand something here. Because I want you to understand misdirection. Because that question, that is only relevant if you say then that George Zimmerman was, in fact, putting his gun out in the store, and that Trayvon Martin was shot at that 7-Eleven convenience store when he bought the pop and the Skittles. And since that did not happen, and had not happened for a while, that does not have any relevance in this case. Nor does it have any relevance in what else y'all are talking about out there, and that is, he shouldn't have got out of his car. He's not shot there either. And getting out of his car is not a violation of any law. You have the right, and the law is very clear. You have the right to be anywhere on public property. You have the right to be anywhere legally on any public property. And it is not against the law to follow somebody, which is not what he was doing, because he had lost Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was running, and Zimmerman was getting out of the car to tell the officers where it was that he had last seen him. He was getting around. He wasn't chasing Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was lost. That's on the tape. The 911 call he made, and he said that they said, "Well, where are you? Where's your location?" He's trying to find out where the location was where he last saw him and what the address would be around in that area. That much is clear. And he got out of the car. Never wanted to follow Trayvon Martin, but then the person asked him on the 911 tape, "Are you following this guy?" And he said yes. He was very honest about it. And the guy then responds on the 911 dispatcher responded and said, "We don't need you to do that." And then this was cut off by NBC. That's why you didn't hear it. His answer was, "Okay." They cut that off at NBC. NBC, that's why they're suing you first. Did you notice that? Last week they announced the suit's coming in now, and the first one they get ready to, in fact, bring a suit about, because it's going to be a domino effect. Start off with the easiest case first, because after that case is won, and the framing there will occur, and why it would be easy with NBC, that would be on MSNBC or LSD-MSNBC, is because they fired folks for the editing job that they did. They've already got on record that they had to get rid of some people who were overzealous in terms of how they were framing the case. In other words, they got fired because they didn't practice CYA tactics, which allowed NBC to throw the proverbial stone and hide his hands, so some folks lost their job. So we got that on record. I mean, that's a part of the record. So they're the first one they're lining up to sue. That's why the attorneys announced last week that they are going to be placing a suit in against NBC immediately in the aftermath of this trial. George Zimmerman said, after they told him, after they said, "Are you following this guy?" And he said, yes. They said, "We don't really need you to do that." And then George Zimmerman answered, "Okay." And NBC, you cut it off. He answered okay. And at that point, we can assume, because everything else he said was true. I mean, he never denied that he said that word that followed the word that preceded the word punk, which you made into coon. Boy, when I think about what these people did, it just really grabs at you when you know the evidence in this case and what they did to fabricate and try to frame this man. This was a legal lynching of a man who was innocent, who had the right to, in fact, defend his life. And for them to say that he had no reason to, in fact, pull his weapon out because the injuries were not sufficient enough, as if he's supposed to wait until it was sufficient enough as if he would know the time when that would occur. And he's been screaming for help for more than a minute. And no one, in fact, helped him. And he's supposed to sit there and let his head be banged against the concrete, which Mark O'Mara brought into the courtroom and said if he had, in fact, dropped it in the court, there would be a contempt of court citation. So he laid it down. But he wanted them to let them see what that sidewalk would have looked like. It was like this, like that thick. And when you put your head against and slam that down against that kind of surface, that doesn't give. Your head has a give. And that's why Dr. Vincent DeMayo was so critical in his testimony, because he looked at those abrasions in the back of his head and noticed that there was a valley in between the abrasions. And he said that since there's no connection between the swollenness on one side and another, and there's a valley in between that's not swollen, it meant that there was a bump this way and a bump that way. And what is it consistent with? It's not consistent with a person doing this, because if you do that, your back goes down first, and your head may not even hit. That's consistent with a person taking your head, and doing that. And that's why it's on both sides, but not in between. Between the two abrasions in the back of his head, there's no swollenness between the two. And that's what Dr. Bauer missed. Because if it was one bump, there'd be swollenness going from one side of his head to the other in a single bump. But that valley there just proves that. And that's what this unbelievable pathologist, forensic pathologist, the leading expert in the world, because the other person are quoting his information. And they called him from other parts of the world to come and testify. That's what they had on that stand. And then they tried to discredit him. They knew they had a problem. They tried to discredit him by asking him what was his salary. And I'm thinking, well, my goodness, they're going to be paying him the money they paid those witnesses in the O.J. Simpson case, because some of those guys got $30,000 for them getting up there. Particularly Wong got up there and said something wrong, and because he didn't speak perfect English, that helped them out, because they didn't like you could come together and have a conspiracy with someone who had broken English, and how do you communicate with him and get him on board to that? So when he said something wrong and then did the blood splattering, and people thought they were looking at the evidence, I mean, that's how they frame that. But no, what he did was just simply get there and very calmly go through the information and leave no doubt about the fact that this was not a one bump on his head ordeal. This man had his head, and he showed bumps on both sides of his head, a brace in the back, and had a broken nose. And he's not supposed to use his weapon. After, first of all, restraining himself and calling for help, which nobody came to help him, and they're talking about this man should have continued to take that beating and then put his life on hold, which might have been sacrificed, and the next blow they were taken to the back of his head. That concrete was not going to give in to his head. And
if Trayvon had killed him, ended up killing him, we never heard about this case.
We never heard about it, and that's what they asked, real quickly, I know we're running out of time, but that's what they asked the attorney, Mark, the Los Angeles Times reporter asked Mark O'Mara. He said, what would have happened if the roles were reversed and that George Zimmerman had been black? And you know what? They thought he was going to say, well, we got a conviction. The black guy didn't get any braces, was what they're trying to get at. And what Mark O'Mara did was say the truth. And we got test cases of it. He said if the roles had been reversed, the trial would never have occurred in the first place. You tell somebody that the person's on top and he's beating you, and you pull your gun out and shoot him, and the person he shot was white, and then the charge would never have been brought. It's as simple as that. Well, I didn't get through all of what I came to talk about. I knew that there was too much to, in fact, conversate about. I do have a post about which you will go and read. I wrote a 4-page post this morning. I couldn't even finish that. I have to go and do a part 2 tomorrow because I'm not finished with it yet. But I wrote it, and the title of it is Black Racism Explains Why These Black Mobs Are in the Street and Why They Were Out There in Oakland, of all places, in Los Angeles, tearing stuff up. It has nothing to do with Trayvon Martin. It has to do with the fact that the Trayvon Martin case gives them cover for what amounts to black racism. Because this was not about no justice, no peace. This was about revenge. Revenge for slavery. Revenge for Jim Crow law. Revenge for segregation. That's what this was about. And that's why they're out there. And we need to, in fact, have a conversation about this. in a much more total way. And I'm going to pick this up next week when we get a chance to, in fact, finish this conversation, because we're not through yet, and we got to come back to it in the following week. Until that time comes, I want you to, as always, to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.